Hello everyone, my name is Zach Adams. Welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be talking about some writing tips. Specifically, this is a tip that you should sort of constantly be working on over your career or your adventure as a writer, if you will. It might be something that you find in the initial stages that you're doing more of when you're doing revisions or you're doing edits after you've done your first draft. It might be something that you find yourself as you get used to the process figuring out, and we're going to talk about the importance of variation. We're going to talk about the importance of variation from sentence to sentence, and we're going to talk about the importance of variation in terms of the kinds of sentences that you're presenting on the page. But yeah, we're going to talk about working those things in and sort of how to use different elements of different things in an attempt to sort of punch up your writing at a sentence by sentence, line by line level, instead of always focusing on plot or on character. These things might be driven by those factors where you might decide that a certain character uses sentences a certain way. And so they might, kind of talk shorter or talk longer or talk in fast spurts and then a long drawl or something like that, so that you can use the way that they are as a person to influence their language, which of course happens to us. That is something that you will find in individual people's speech patterns in your life too, which is a great place to pull the inspiration for these things from. If this is your first time on the channel, we talk about writing, we talk about books, we talk about the publishing industry and how to sort of go about things from a sort of like drafting, editing, querying sort of perspective as we are doing things. And I will update you guys on where I'm at in that process in a vlog. If that sounds interesting to you, go ahead and hit the subscribe button and hit the notification bell, and it will let you know every time we post. We post 3 times a week. So I'm going to read you a passage from Dune, only I am going to change this. This is an exercise that you can use if you're sort of struggling with this concept. I'm going to change these sentences so that their sentence structure is sort of the exact same every single time, and then I'm going to read you how it's actually written. The litter tipped slightly as the Harkonnen troopers maneuvered through the doorway into starlit night. The censored buoy rasped against the doorway. The sand they were on grated on their feet. The thopter wing loomed overhead, blotting the stars. The litter settled to the ground. So what I've done there is basically taken the and moved some of the subjects of the sentence from where they had predicate clauses or they were in a different sort of sentence structure where it wasn't always subject, verb, object. I have moved that around in this, and this is how it actually reads. The litter tipped slightly as the Harkonnen troopers maneuvered it through the doorway into starlit night. A censer buoy rasped against the doorway. Then they were on sand, feet grating in it. A thopter wing loomed overhead, blotting the stars. The litter settled to the ground. I really only made one major change in sentence structure to then they were on sand, feet grating in it. It's these little variations that are, you don't have to go a whole long way in this, but you'll notice that everything that you sort of like have written or read that you love, you've done something like this, where there are slight variations from sentence to sentence. If we also look at the sentence length in this, the first sentence is quite long. The litter tipped slightly as the Harkonnen troopers maneuvered it through the doorway into starlit night. And then we're hit with a short sentence. A suspensor buoy rasped against the doorway. Then they were on sand, feet grating in it. And then we get a little longer again. A thopter wing loomed overhead, blotting the stars. And then we get the punchline sentence at the end, the shortest of all the sentences so far in this paragraph. The litter settled to the ground. We have description, description, description. There's very little action in here, and the action comes at the end in the short, punchy sentence. And there are ways to do this in reverse, where you use shorter sentences, shorter sentences, shorter sentence, and you've really retained a lot of the audience's attention in this, and you build momentum as you're going forward. And then you hit them with the longer rolling sentence towards the end of this, where you hit them with clause and clause and clause, or you hit them with something that's compound. There's a lot of ways to do this, and you might try different ways as you go through, and write the same paragraph 3 different ways, varying your sentences, and see which of these you like best. I've now grabbed I'm Not a Serial Killer by Dan Wells. I'm using multiple books here, and I'm specifically not using classics or things that we might think of as extremely well written. These are just sort of good books. I mean, Dune is well written, but no one would say that Dune is the major blockbuster hit that Dune is because of the style, because of the language that's used, right? Dan Wells is a great writer too. I'm not going to take anything away from Dan Wells, but I don't think that anyone is looking at a young adult novel about a teenage serial killer and going, wow, that prose, right? If we look at this page, I will put a picture of the page up over here. The page itself starts with a little bit of dialogue and then has a fairly long description paragraph where there's some action in there. And then we have a short paragraph where there's sort of a really wrap up sum of this thing. As quickly as the violence had erupted, it ceased. The policeman, the demon, the guns, the street, the cold night sky, all were as silent as a tomb. And this was only 2 sentences, but you can already see in these sentences that they're varied themselves, right? And this is what I was talking about earlier, where you can do short sentences and then boom, and hit them with something long. As quickly as the violence had erupted, it ceased. The policeman, the demon, the guns, the street, the cold night sky, all were as silent as a tomb. And so this, one, you've got the word violence and erupted and ceased, which is a sort of like very quick ending, right? Like you have very active verbs in that first sentence. Those active verbs are combined with the short quickness of the sentence. In fact, the word quick is actually in the sentence. Quickly as the violence had erupted, it ceased. Bam, ba-bam, ba-bam. Good, good, good. And then you get the long sentence with the da-da, 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 da-da. And then right at the end, as silent as a tomb. Then from that short paragraph, we've gone short, long, short. We get a sort of medium-sized paragraph here. It's got some description of what's going on. And then we get another medium size, and then we get a short, which is 3 sentences. Short, long, short. And then we get another half-page paragraph on the thing, right? One of the things that you'll notice with this is that the variance isn't just taking place in paragraph size. It's taking place in a lot of these as varying the kind of sentence. So I've just flipped back. I'm now going to be on page 97, and I will put that up over here as well, right? And you have a little bit of dialogue at the top of this page, right? It's mixed in with a little bit of description, holding up a chisel, sentence, right? There's a little bit of dialogue, follow that with like almost a full paragraph of description right after the 2 small parts there. And then you get another sentence with a little bit of description. Single sentence, there's no dialogue in there at all, right? A little bit of dialogue, description, dialogue, and it's going description, dialogue, right? There are people who write and have a longer conversational style. In fact, Dune does this, especially in the later parts where the people are talking back and forth a lot in the sort of planning right before the climax. But even in this, there are still points where there's description interspersed, and not every single paragraph includes dialogue, right? Even if there is dialogue in most of the paragraphs, they also have description. Because without description, if it's just dialogue, right? Like you might as well have 2 people sitting in a room just having a conversation back and forth, and there's very little action. That has to be the most interesting conversation. And normally, even if it's interesting, it can't go on for that long to remain interesting to a reader. And so there needs to be something that moves. Is there seed? Chani asked. There is seed, the man said. Chani knelt and put her hands to the sloshing sack. Blessed is the water and its seed. Right? Like, is there seed? Yes, there's seed. Action. Now we go back. She could have just said, this right here, Chani knelt and put hands into the sloshing sack. That could have been left out entirely. It doesn't lend anything to the conversation. She could just say, blessed is the water and its seed. Then the description continues after that dialogue. There's familiarity to the right, and Jessica looked back at the Reverend Mother Romulo. The old woman's eyes were closed, and she sat hunched over as though asleep. Sayadina, Jessica, Chani said. Jessica turned to see the girl staring up at her. Have you tasted the blessed water? Chani asked. There's emotion happening. There's still some action moving people along. One of the great things that you can see in television, especially on television, as in like episodes of television, not movies, is if a conversation is just going to happen, if really what the scene needs is just two people sharing information, they'll have them share that information. This happens a lot in medical shows while they're walking somewhere. One, because the movement itself, the action itself, gives the feeling of moving forward in the story. The same is true on the page. If there's no movement, if there's no description, if it's just line, 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 you lose a lot of that, which is why they have to add that, because a screenplay does just include line, 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 line. And so when you're delivering lines back and forth like that, you often create movement. You can see this in plays. Very, very rarely, even when someone is giving a soliloquy, do they stand rooted in place in a play. They are moving about the stage, pondering to themselves, interacting with objects, or changing the sort of like range of where their delivery is going to, right? So they may be delivering here and then ponder over here and sort of come back to be quizzical here, right? Like there's a movement to happen. And so you can't just deliver dialogue, dialogue, dialogue. You have to deliver description, action, dialogue, dialogue, action, dialogue, action, description, right? Like these are things that you can mix in even, right? Exposition, dialogue, so that there's a variance to the kinds of information and the way that information is being delivered for the reader. Otherwise, they grow very bored very quickly. It is something you'll lose the attention. And this is when you'll find your readers. If you have beta readers, you have people that give you feedback. They might say, if they're being honest, they might say, I had a hard time getting through this section, or I had difficulty with staying focused here. I couldn't really tell what was going on in this scene. And those are things that might lend you to look towards, am I varying my sentence structure? Am I varying my paragraph sizes? Am I varying the way that I'm delivering information? I hope that has been helpful. I hope that you have learned something that you might take and apply to your own writing. I know that this is something that revision by revision, I still change this, I still alter this. I don't think that you ever sort of stop looking at the sentence by sentence level of your writing, trying to make it better as you improve, your verb choices and your sentence lengths and the kinds of ways that you create predicate clauses, or if you digress mid-sentence, right? Like these sorts of things are things that you can tweak to create different effects in your writing. And I hope this has been helpful to point out some of the ways that you might use that. If you found this video useful, please give it a like. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. I have been Zach Adams. Thanks for stopping by, traveler.